rusted bay doors of the Hells Angels clubhouse swung open to reveal a trespasser. But it wasn't a rival biker. It was a shivering, mud-caked 10-year-old boy. When the towering bikers forcibly opened his battered canvas backpack, the terrifying discovery inside brought the heavily armed chapter to its knees. The rain hammering against the corrugated steel roof of the Spokane chapter of the Hells Angels sounded like a barrage of heavy artillery. It was 3 in the morning on a brutal November Tuesday, the kind of night that kept even the most hardened street hustlers indoors. The clubhouse, a sprawling, fortified warehouse on the industrial edge of the Spokane River, was a fortress. Guard dogs roamed the perimeter, razor wire crowned the high chain-link fences, and high-definition security cameras monitored every blind spot. Nobody just walked into a Hells Angels compound. You were either invited or you were dragged in. Inside the cavernous main garage, the air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco, spilled bourbon, and motor oil. Dave Corcoran, the chapter president, sat at a scarred wooden workbench, methodically cleaning his Colt M1911. Dave was a mountain of a man, standing 6'4" with a braided gray beard, and arms thick with faded, decades-old ink. His face was a roadmap of violent history, but his eyes were sharp and unyielding. Sitting across from him was his sergeant-at-arms, Tommy Knuckles Callahan, a tightly wound former middleweight boxer who was currently running a rag over a polished chrome exhaust pipe. The low hum of the vintage refrigerator and the rhythmic scraping of Tommy's rag were suddenly interrupted by a sharp, metallic clatter from the rear storage bay. It was the distinct sound of a wrench hitting the concrete floor. Tommy froze, his hand instinctively dropping to the heavy hunting knife sheathed at his hip. He looked at Dave. Neither man spoke, but the silent communication of men who had survived decades of turf wars was instantaneous. Someone had breached the perimeter. Dave slowly racked the slide of his 1911, the metallic click echoing loudly in the quiet garage. Tommy retrieved a sawed-off shotgun from beneath a stack of grease rags. They moved with terrifying, practiced silence, flanking the narrow hallway that led to the rear bay. The storage area was where the club kept their most prized custom builds and, more importantly, where they temporarily stored shipments that were not meant for public eyes. Rivals? Tommy mouthed, pressing his back against the brick wall. Dave shook his head. If it was a rival club, they wouldn't have sneaked in to drop a wrench. They would have come through the front door with automatic weapons. This felt like a rat, a thief looking to steal parts. Tommy kicked the heavy steel door open, sweeping the dark room with the barrel of his shotgun. Dave reached around and slammed the wall switch. The flickering fluorescent tubes buzzed to life, casting a harsh, pale light over the rows of gleaming motorcycles. "Hands while I can see them," Dave roared, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls like thunder. "Move and you're dead." There was no answering shout, no scramble of boots. Just a tiny, pathetic whimper from the far corner, squeezed in the narrow gap between a wall of tool chests and Dave's prized, custom-built 1947 knucklehead Harley. Tommy lowered his shotgun a fraction, his brow furrowing in confusion. He stepped closer, boots crunching on spilled kitty litter used to soak up oil. He reached down and yanked a heavy canvas top away. Both men froze, their weapons suddenly feeling absurdly heavy and entirely useless. Cowering on the cold floor, knees pulled tightly to his chest, was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 10. He was painfully thin, wearing a torn, oversized adult winter coat that was soaked through with freezing rain. His face was smeared with mud and engine grease, and his blonde hair was matted to his forehead. His teeth were chattering so violently that they made a clicking sound in the quiet room. But what struck Dave instantly were the boy's eyes. They were wide, feral, and filled with the kind of absolute terror that Dave usually only saw in the eyes of men who knew they were about to take their last breath. "Well, I'll be damned," Tommy muttered, letting the shotgun hang by its strap. He looked back at his president. "Dave, it's a kid." "The white trot." "I have eyes, Tommy," Dave grumbled. though his gruff exterior hid a sudden wave of profound unease. He holstered his pistol and took a slow step forward, holding his hands up to show they were empty. "Hey there, little man. Nobody's gonna hurt you. How the hell did you get past the dogs?" The boy didn't answer. He'd pressed himself harder against the brick wall as if trying to phase through the solid masonry. His small, trembling arms were wrapped fiercely around a battered olive-green canvas backpack. He clutched it to his chest like a shield, his knuckles white with strain. "Listen to me," Dave said, softening his deep voice as much as a man like him could. "You're freezing to death. You need to come out from back there before you catch pneumonia. We've got a heater in the main room." That. The boy shook his head frantically, his eyes darting toward the heavy steel exit doors, calculating an impossible escape. "Jimmy!" Dave suddenly bellowed over his shoulder, making the kid flinch. "Jimmy, get out here!" A few moments later, Jimmy O'Connor, the club's grizzled, semi-retired mechanic, hobbled into the bay, wiping sleep from his eyes. When he saw the kid, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Bring a blanket from the bunk room and heat up whatever's left of that chili on the stove," Dave ordered, never taking his eyes off the trembling boy. "We got a stray." 10 minutes later, the boy was sitting on a leather bar stool in the clubhouse's main lounge. A heavy wool army blanket was draped over his small shoulders, dwarfing him entirely. Jimmy had placed a steaming bowl of beef chili in front of him, along with a thick slice of white bread. The heat radiating from the massive cast-iron wood stove nearby was finally starting to bring some color back to the boy's pale, dirt-streaked cheeks. Dave, Tommy, and Jimmy stood a few feet away, forming an imposing semicircle of leather, denim, and muscle. They watched in silence as the kid ate. He didn't use the spoon. He was scooping the chili directly into his mouth with the piece of bread, eating with the frantic, desperate aggression of a starved animal. Yet even as he devoured the food, his left arm remained locked in a vice grip around the olive-green backpack sitting on his lap. He hadn't let it out of his sight for a single second. "Slow down, kid. You're gonna make yourself sick," Jimmy warned gently, leaning against the felt edge of the billiards table. The boy ignored him, finishing the bowl and licking the stray drops of sauce from his bruised knuckles. When he was done, he pulled the blanket tighter and stared fiercely at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the towering bikers. "All right," Dave said, stepping forward and pulling up a wooden chair to sit at eye level with the boy. "You're warm. You're fed. Now it's time to talk. What's your name?" "Silence. Look, kid," Tommy chimed in, crossing his thick arms. "You broke into a Hells Angels compound. Do you have any idea how lucky you are that we didn't release the hounds? Or shoot through the door? You need to tell us who you are and why you're hiding in our garage." The boy finally looked up. His voice, when it came, was hoarse and barely a whisper. "I'm Leo." "Okay, Leo," Dave said, resting his heavy forearms on his knees. "Where are your folks? Did you run away from home?" Leo shook his head. "Don't have a home." Dave exchanged a heavy look with Jimmy. Homeless kids weren't entirely uncommon in the sprawling, opioid-ravaged neighborhoods of the city, but they rarely ventured this far out into the industrial park, and they certainly didn't possess the skill to bypass motion sensors and deadbolt locks. "How did you get in here, Leo?" Dave asked, leaning in closer. The gate was locked. The dogs were out. "The dogs like beef jerky," Leo mumbled softly, "and I squeezed through the drainage pipe by the river. The grate is rusted out. You should fix it." Tommy let out a low whistle of begrudging respect. "Okay, Leo, you're a smart kid," Dave continued, his eyes drifting down to the filthy backpack. "Now, what's in the bag?" Leo immediately tensed. His posture went rigid, and he pulled the bag tighter against his chest, tucking his chin defensively. "Nothing. Nothing looked like nothing," Tommy said, his tone dropping an octave, losing some of its previous patience. "Looks heavy. Looks like you're protecting it. You steal that from somewhere?" You hiding stash for some local dealer? No, Leo shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, fierce panic. It's mine. Leave it alone. Dave frowned. But this club had strict rules, and one of them was knowing exactly what was under their roof at all times. If this kid was carrying drugs, stolen cash, or a weapon used in a crime, it could bring the heat of the feds right down on their heads. The clubhouse was a sanctuary, but it was also a business. Leo, I need you to hand over the bag, Dave said firmly, extending his massive, calloused hand. I'm not asking. You're under our roof. No. Leo scrambled backward off the bar stool, the blanket dropping to the floor. He tried to bolt for the hallway, but Tommy was faster. The sergeant-at-arms moved with terrifying speed, grabbing the boy by the collar of his oversized coat and lifting him off his feet. Hey, take it easy on him, Tommy, Jimmy warned, stepping forward. I ain't hurting him, Tommy grunted, holding the flailing boy at arm's length. With his free hand, he grabbed the thick canvas strap of the backpack and yanked. Leo screamed a high, piercing sound of pure agony, as if Tommy were ripping away a piece of his own flesh. Give it back, please. It's all I have. Don't look at it. Tommy ignored the boy's thrashing, dropping Leo safely onto the leather sofa before tossing the heavy backpack onto the green felt of the pool table. Let's see what kind of trouble you brought into my house, Dave muttered, stepping out to the table. He reached out and undid the heavy brass buckles. The canvas was stiff with dried mud and age. Leo sat on the couch, sobbing violently, his face buried in his hands. He couldn't bear to watch. Dave pulled open the main compartment. He expected to find bricks of heroin, wabs of stolen cash, or perhaps the jewelry from a recent pawnshop smash and grab. Instead, he reached in and pulled out something wrapped tightly in an old, oil-stained flannel shirt. The room went dead silent. The only sound was Leo's muffled crying and the crackle of the wood stove. Dave slowly unwrapped the flannel, peeling the fabric back layer by layer. His breath hitched in his throat. Tommy, standing next to him, went completely rigid, all the color draining from his face. Resting on the flannel was a heavy, tarnished silver skull ring. It wasn't generic. The skull had a distinct crack sculpted into the left eye socket, and the number 81 was deeply engraved into the band. Beside it lay a set of dull military dog tags, and beneath that a small, worn leather journal embossed with the Grim Reaper insignia of the Hells Angels Spokane chapter. But what caused Dave Corcoran's massive hands to begin trembling uncontrollably was the heavy, blood-stained leather cutter biker's vest that he pulled from the bottom of the bag. The patches on the back were faded, but the rocker on the bottom clearly read Spokane, and the rectangular patch on the front breast read V.B. It was a vice president's cut. Jimmy O'Connor that had a choked gasp, taking a stumbling step back until he hit the bar. Dave. Is that? Dave couldn't speak. He stared at the tarnished silver ring, his mind violently reeling. He knew every scratch, every dent on that piece of silver. He had been standing in the jewelry shop 30 years ago when it was custom cast. It belonged to Iron Mike Corcoran, Dave's older brother, the former vice president of the chapter, who had vanished without a single trace into the cold Washington night exactly 15 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a pool of blood in a motel parking lot and a grieving club. The police presumed him dead. The club presumed him murdered by a rival cartel. Dave slowly turned his head, his eyes locking onto the small, terrified, mud-caked boy reaping on the sofa. The world around the biker seemed to tilt on its axis. "Boy," Dave whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of shock, rage, and profound grief. The booming authority of the club president was gone, replaced by the broken rasp of the haunted man. "Boy, look at me." Leo sniffled, slowly lifting his tear-streaked face from his hands. Dave held up the tarnished silver skull ring, his hand shaking so badly it rattled against the dog tags. "Where in God's name did you get this?" The heavy silence in the Spokane clubhouse was suffocating, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the steel roof and the crackle of the wood stove. Dave Corcoran stood paralyzed, his massive chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow breaths. The tarnished silver skull ring in his palm felt as heavy as a cinder block. To the rest of the world, it was just a piece of biker jewelry. To Dave, it was a ghost materialized in the dim light of the garage. Leo shrunk back into the corner of the leather sofa, his knees pulled up to his chin. The fierce protectiveness he had shown over the bag just moments before had completely evaporated, replaced by the sheer, overwhelming terror of a child who had finally reached the end of a very long, very dark road. "I asked you a question, boy," Dave said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous whisper that made Tommy Knuckles Callahan flinch. Dave took a slow step toward the couch. "Where did you get this?" Leo's lower lip trembled violently. He wiped his nose with the back of a filthy sleeve, leaving a smear of grease across his pale cheek. "He told me not to let anyone see it. He told me to only give it to the giant with the eagle on his neck." Dave froze. Instinctively, his free hand reached up to touch the collar of his shirt, just below his jawline, where the faded, sprawling ink of a bald eagle gripped a Harley-Davidson engine. It was a tattoo he had gotten when he was 19. Only his inner circle knew the details of that specific ink. Jimmy O'Connor leaned heavily against the billiards table, his face ashen. "Dave, the kid. Look at his eyes. Look at the jawline." Dave stared at the trembling boy. Beneath the layers of mud, exhaustion, and malnutrition, the familial resemblance was undeniable. The sharp angle of the jaw, the unruly mop of dirty blonde hair, and those piercing, stubbornly defiant blue eyes. They were the exact same eyes that used to stare back at Dave from across the clubhouse bar 15 years ago. "Who gave this to you, Leo?" Dave asked, his voice suddenly cracking, all the threatening bass draining out of it. "My dad," Leo whispered, a fresh tear cutting a clean track through the dirt on his face. "His name was Mike. Sometimes people called him Iron. But he was just my dad." Tommy let out a sharp, breathless curse, running a hand through his closely cropped hair and turning away. He paced toward the shadowed hallway, unable to process the revelation. Jimmy simply closed his eyes and crossed himself. Dave's legs finally gave out. The towering chapter president collapsed onto the heavy wooden chair opposite the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The silver ring clattered onto the floor, rolling to a stop against the toe of Leo's worn-out sneakers. For a long minute, the only sound was the jagged, ragged breathing of a man mourning a brother he thought he had buried in his heart a decade and a half ago. When Dave finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed and fierce. "Mike is alive. Where is he? Is he outside? Is he in trouble?" Leo slowly shook his head, looking down at the ring at his feet. "He's gone. He died 3 years ago. His heart just stopped working one night. We buried him behind the cabin in Montana." The finality of the words hit the room like a physical shockwave. The faint, impossible hope that had just flared to life in Dave's chest was brutally snuffed out. "And your mother?" Jimmy asked softly, stepping closer and offering the boy a clean rag to wipe his face. "Her name was Claire," Leo sniffled, taking the rag and clutching it. "She got sick last winter. Really sick. The doctors said it was in her blood. She tried to hold on, but she passed away 2 months ago. The bank took the cabin. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Dave picked up the silver ring from the floor and placed it gently back onto the pool table next to the blood-stained leather cat. "Why didn't he come back, Leo? Why did my brother let us think he was murdered in that motel parking lot 15 years ago? We tore this city apart looking for him. We went to war. He said he had to disappear to keep you all alive," Leo explained, his voice gaining a fraction of steadiness as he recalled his father's final instructions. "He told me the story 100 times before he died. He made me memorize this place, the address, the drainage pipe, He said if I was ever truly alone, I had to come here and give you the book. Dave's eyes drifted to the worn, leather-bound journal sitting atop the folded flannel. It looked ancient, the edges of the pages yellowed and warped by moisture. But I wasn't just coming here because I was alone, Leo added, his voice dropping to a frightened whisper. He looked over his shoulder at the heavy steel doors as if expecting them to be kicked off their hinges at any moment. I came because of the men in the black suits. After Mom died, they started showing up at the foster home. They were looking for Dad's things. They tore apart our old storage unit. They were looking for the bag. Tommy stopped pacing and spun around, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of his hunting knife. Feds? I don't know, Leo shivered. They had guns. They hurt the man who ran the foster home. That's when I took the bag from where I buried it and started running. It took me 3 weeks to hitchhike here from Billings. Dave reached out and gently laid a massive hand on Leo's knee. Nobody is going to hurt you here, Leo. You have my word on my life. He turned his gaze to the pool table. Let's see what Mike was willing to die for. That too. Dave walked over to the green felt table and carefully picked up the leather journal. The cover was stiff, the embossed Grim Reaper logo barely visible under years of wear. He flipped it open. The handwriting inside was undeniably Mike's, a chaotic, hurried scrawl in black ink that completely filled the margins. Tommy and Jimmy crowded in behind Dave's shoulders as he began to read the first entry aloud, his voice low and tight. If you're reading this, Dave, it means I'm dead, and I couldn't keep the wolves from the door forever. I'm sorry I left you in the dark. Daramore. But if you knew the truth, you would have gone to war, and it would have gotten every single angel in Spokane slaughtered. Dave swallowed hard, turning the page. The entries detailed the weeks leading up to Mike's disappearance. It wasn't a rival cartel that had ambushed Mike at the motel. It was a coordinated hit squad orchestrated by someone deeply embedded in local law enforcement. It was Agent Richard Sterling, Dave read, his blood running cold at the mention of the name. Tommy cursed violently, kicking the leg of the pool table. Richard Sterling wasn't just a local cop. He was the current regional director of the DEA. He was a man who practically owned the city's political infrastructure, a supposed champion of law and order who had built his career on taking down organized crime syndicates. Sterling was running the northern supply routes using our club as a blind, the journal continued. He had a rat in our charter, Big John, God rest his traitorous soul. Sterling was moving military-grade weapons to our trucks, and when I found the manifests, he panicked. He ambushed me at the motel. I took a bullet to the ribs, but I managed to put a knife in the throat of one of his mercenaries and get away. Dave's hands gripped the edges of the journal so tightly the leather creaked. He remembered the blood at the motel. They had assumed it was Mike's death scene. In reality, it was his brutal, narrow escape. I knew if I went back to the clubhouse, Sterling would use the full force of the federal government to raid the compound. He would plant evidence, shoot first, and wipe out the entire Spokane chapter to cover his tracks. He wouldn't have stood a chance against his tactical teams. So I ran. I became a ghost. I took the proof with me to keep him looking over his shoulder, knowing that if he ever moved on you, I would leak the documents. Dave flipped toward the back of the journal. Tucked securely between the final pages were several folded pieces of paper, sealed in a waterproof plastic sleeve. He pulled them out. They were original shipping manifests, bank routing numbers, and deeply incriminating photographs of Agent Sterling meeting with known cartel lieutenants. It was an absolute smoking gun preserved for 15 years. Son of a bitch, Jimmy whispered, staring at the photographs. Mike sacrificed his whole life. His family, his club, just to keep us off the DEA's radar. And now Sterling is gearing up for a run at the governor's office, Tommy growled, his fists clenched tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He must have finally tracked down Claire in Montana. He realized Mike was dead and decided it was time to tie up the final loose end. Dave looked away from the documents and turned his gaze back to Leo. The boy was watching them with wide, terrified eyes, still clutching the wool blanket around his frail shoulders. He had walked hundreds of miles, surviving on scraps and hiding in ditches, carrying a death warrant in his backpack just to fulfill his father's final wish. A profound, burning rage ignited in Dave's chest, hot and absolute, but it was matched by an equally powerful wave of fierce, undeniable love for the boy shivering on his couch. "Leo," Dave said, walking over and kneeling in front of the boy so they were perfectly at eye level. He didn't care about the mud or the grease. He reached out and pulled the 10-year-old into a crushing embrace. For the first time since he had breached the compound, Leo didn't flinch. He buried his face in Dave's heavy leather vest and began to sob, his small hands gripping the fabric of the chapter president's cut with desperate strength. "You did good, kid," Dave whispered fiercely into the boy's hair. "You did so damn good, your daddy would be proud." When Dave finally pulled back, he stood up to his full 6'4" height, the aura of the grieving brother vanishing, replaced entirely by the terrifying, commanding presence of a Hell's Angel president preparing for war. "Tommy," Dave barked, "lock down the compound. Nobody goes in or out without my say-so. Call the sergeant-at-arms in Seattle and Portland. Tell them we need every able-bodied rider they can spare down here by tomorrow night." "You got it, boss," Tommy said, a dark, eager grin spreading across his battered face as he pulled his phone from his pocket. "Jimmy," Dave continued, turning to the old mechanic, "take Leo back to the bunkhouse. Get him a hot shower, find him some clothes that fit, and make him whatever he wants to eat. He's family. He's Mike's blood. He's one of us now, and nobody, not the feds, not Sterling, not God himself, is taking him from this house." Jimmy nodded, offering a gentle hand to Leo. "Come on, little man, let's get you cleaned up." "Nah, Torat, sis." Leo hesitated, looking back at the pool table. "What about the bag? What about the book?" Dave walked over to the table and picked up his brother's tarnished silver skull ring. He walked back to Leo and pressed the heavy silver band into the boy's small, dirt-stained palm, closing the kid's fingers over it. "I'll take care of the book, Leo," Dave said, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury as he looked toward the reinforced steel doors of the garage. "Agent Sterling owes this club a massive debt, and it's time we collected. If you were captivated by this incredible story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and a son's perilous journey to honor his father, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to spread this gripping tale of justice. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling real-life stories.